now we're just going to move on to designing professional learning strategies for the future. So, as John has said, and from the survey results, most schools are actually looking to go online. They're looking for new types of content. It really begs the question, how does a school actually design a professional learning strategy for the future? So to discuss this, I'm joined by Rochelle Bright. Rochelle's a consultant and learning specialist in our Melbourne office. She's literally worked with hundreds of schools over the years to help them design professional learning strategies. So welcome, Rochelle.
Thanks, James.
So I might just start with the most obvious question is, if you're going to design a professional learning strategy for the future, where do you start? What's the very first thing you do?
Yeah, I think the very first thing you do is to identify the current scope of professional learning within your school. You can do that by asking a few questions, these key questions here. So what are the different types of professional learning required in your school? Who are you responsible for training, which can vary greatly in each school or organisation, and then who's responsible for ensuring the training is completed and the records of that training is maintained, as Jonathan was just discussing. So the answers to the questions will depend really on the nature, the size and complexity of your school operations, and it'll definitely be different for every school. So whether you have a defined professional learning strategy in place or not, these questions can really help to find the gaps in your current strategy.
And what are the different types of professional learning?
Yeah, this may seem like a very simple question, but it's not. Types of learning can be subject-based or they can be role-based. So, on the screen here, obvious subject-based training really includes things like child protection training, workplace safety training, both legally required, as we've heard. So we've got, HR-related training covering things like bullying, harassment, and anti-discrimination. We've got other soft skills training in areas such as well-being and leadership, general communication. Then there's things like first aid for staff, how to deal with student health and safety issues such as anaphylaxis and asthma, and of course, excursion management. Then of course you do have governance, risk and compliance related training covering areas as well, such as privacy and complaints. And that's on top of all of that curriculum-based PD for teachers. So the most important aspect here really is to drill down and understand what you're training, what you might not be training staff in, and why. And some of the questions around that might be, are providers difficult to find? Are they expensive, or is your compliance-focused learning taking all the spotlight, which we know it can do? Is there a better way to do it, which we are really discussing today and has been the focus in recent times? And now, looking at the current climate, is that online training more effective in some areas? So if we move to the next slide, we'll be able to see really looking at who are you responsible for training helps understand this as well. So you can do it either. You can look at the subject matter or you can look at the person in the roles. And this slide here relates to types of professional learning that are role-based. So really this is where the list can get very long depending on the nature of your school's operations. So you can have anything from your governors, teachers, through to casual sports and co-curricular staff, even fire wardens, which is obviously not a job title as such, but is a role across your school. So it's very important to understand the full range of those you're training because this is critical in your overall plan for learning. So let's take a look at a scenario here. So we've got child protection training. Now this is this is how you can do it really. You can look at that subject matter like child protection. You can start mapping it across 2 different roles and who you would need to train. So really we've only got 3 listed there, but obviously the list would be much longer and could be very long in some schools. So you've got, governors, you've got your leaders, you've got your child protection officers, you do have teachers, relief teachers, you've got music itinerants, which is often forgotten, you've got maintenance staff, direct contact volunteers, you've got nurses and even counsellors in some schools. So you may need to provide that, and it doesn't have to be just policy training, it can be the safety workshops that you do sometimes, the child safety workshops that I know some schools do. So that's the type of scenario, taking a subject like child protection, pushing it out, checking each role against that. Who is missing from this that you're currently missing off your list? And in the next slide, we can see that I've also taken a scenario, if you're wanting to look at it, and this is usually the way that I often look at the planning for a school, is to take a role, to reverse that and take a role. And as in the scenario, you can take the sports coach here, which may be a casual sports coach in some schools, but might be employed sports coaches in other schools. And then list exactly what they need to be across to work with your students and at your sites. So, you know, you've got your handbooks or child safety codes of conduct potentially cropping up here, your privacy policy acknowledgements maybe, workplace safety definitely, first aid in some way, maybe it's a full certification, sometimes it only has to be awareness, which we do have in our learning list at the moment as well. And things like the ASIA and anaphylaxis, ASIA anaphylaxis, which is that free online course, and then your asthma training. So those are what schools are commonly using these days. So that is another way to look at it. And that's often the way that I go into schools and look at this, and may have done that with you, with many of you anyway, who are listening today. So next, really, once you've identified who you need to train and what they need to be trained on, really thoroughly, you really need to identify who is responsible for making sure that the training is completed in the school. And that does vary, and you can see the list here of who it may fall to. And it will really depend upon your school as to who does what. It may only be the principal or deputy at some schools, but it may be all of these people and more at other schools. But it's really important to get their buy-in and understand, you know, that they can help you with that central learning strategy, and they can be involved and be included in the learning system. They can put their stuff onto the learning system, and nobody has to miss out that way. Okay, so really, how do we pull all of this together? Developing a professional learning roadmap is really key here. So using simple training needs analysis tools, looking at your professional learning scope, you can really begin to effectively map all learning required in your school and how and when to do it. So you really do need to start with the roles, check it against the subject matter, perform some risk or gap assessments to measure consequences of a gap in your professional learning. Look at how the training is delivered. We know that blended learning is the best way to do it. And also, what's the duration and frequency of the learning? So, you know, how long are these learning items taking? Are they micro learning bites, or are they much longer? Do they need to happen annually, or are they, you know, 6 monthly, you know, every 3 years, etc.? And one thing we haven't got up here is really prioritize your learning. And you don't have to do this all at once. Even if you start small with what you already have and then start to feather in once you find your gaps and start to feather in exactly what you need into this, what you'll end up with is a lovely little calendar, maybe such as in this example. Doesn't have to be like this, obviously. And then plot your training cycles. It'll really provide you an understanding of where your pressure points are during the year and any gaps in your training and gaps of, you know, who is missing out on training. Okay, so now you've got the roadmap. It leaves us with the question of how you do all of this and put it into place. And luckily, it's a little easier here, this question. In that respect, we can clearly see that there are 3 key elements to developing this successful learning strategy for the future. And that is your staff learning system, which is available anytime, anywhere. And your CompliLearn portal really provides the centralized ability for the admin access, the reporting, the ability to incorporate multiple types of training, and making your own content, which we know at schools you absolutely do a lot of. Then we've got the high quality learning content, which can be the face-to-face or online, and it's vital to have a combination there for your staff engagement and really effective learning, underpinned by your vision and plan there. So James mentioned at the beginning that we ran a little webinar recently, unlocking the value of the CompliLearn platform, that looked at all the key features and benefits and usages maybe of how you can use the platform. And we'll send that to you after this session. However, looking at it, you can see here on the screen just a refresher of what is available in the system. And you've got creating your own content, notifications, the reporting, and then that easy access and tracking some PD that maybe not that's maybe not included in your overall courses available. So you can record that external learning. So the last slide here, where can you source your content? Your content, really, you can source it through the external third party. Seminars, conferences, all of that can be recorded in your system. It doesn't have to be created as a course. It can just be recorded by the attendees. Then you've got your internal, maybe you've invited third-party presenters to your school, asking them if you can record them, recording their slides or asking to have their slides in place into your library on CompliLearn, and also then your internal school-produced information that everybody knows that you're always doing in staff meetings, staff readings, and so on. And finally, it's that online learning piece and accessing any third-party online pieces. So CompliSpace is one, we provide you with that. We've got our learning lists, but there are so many, like the ACEA courses, the asthma courses, anything that you can access, you can build into your library.